In this video, I'm going to explain how we form le conditionnel présent, or the conditional tense or mood, in French. We use the conditional tense or mood to say when we want to say would in English. For example, if it was raining, I would stay inside. If he was rich, he would buy the house. In the future, they would like to go to university. As we've seen, in English, we use the word would. We're using the conditional tense. But in French, there is no translation of would. We can't just translate that. A bit like in the future tense, there's no word for will. So we're going to have to add some endings onto the end of our verbs. If you already know how to use the future tense, the conditional is very easy. The endings are just a little bit different. Our endings are AIS, AIS, AIT, IONS, IEZ, and AIENT. And these endings are the equivalent of would, and we're going to put those onto the end of the future stem. So the future stem is exactly the same as the future stem that we would use with the future tense. Let's have a look at how we would conjugate the conditional tense with the verb danser, to dance. So we want to say people would dance. So we're going to start with I would dance, and we're going to have je, then we have the infinitive danser, and then we add our ending AIS, so that would be the equivalent of would. Je danserai, I would dance. Tu, this time again we're going to use the infinitive danser, and we're going to add AIS onto the end, and this time it means you would dance. Tu danserais. Il, elle, on, he, she, one, again, danser in the infinitive, and this time we're adding A-I-T to the end. Il, elle, on danserait, he, she, one would dance. So you can see that our future stem here is the infinitive danser, and that's the case with most verbs in French. And if we have a look at our plural pronouns, nous, we, danser is our stem, and then we're going to add IONS, so nous danserions, we would dance. With vous, we are going to add an IEZ, so vous, danser is our stem, IEZ, y, so vous danseriez. You would dance. And then finally, we'll look at il and elle, they. And our ending is AIENT. We don't pronounce the ENT, so il, elle danserait, they would dance. So just like when we conjugate any verb in the third person with the ENT on the end, we don't hear it. For the conditional tense, we need to add our endings, our would endings, onto the future stem. Normally, this is the infinitive of the verb. So here are some infinitives that we can look at as examples. Manger, finir, danser, regarder, boire, descendre. If they end in an E, like boire or descendre, we're just going to remove the E before we add our ending. So a reminder that our endings are AIS, AIS, AIT, IONS, IEZ, AIENT. They will just go on to the end of the infinitive for the majority of verbs in French. If we have a look at some examples, we're going to use the verb regarder, to watch. So, je regarderai, I would watch. Tu regarderais, you would watch. Il regarderait, he would watch. Nous regarderions, we would watch. Vous regarderiez, you would watch. Ils regarderaient, they would watch. Again, a reminder, we don't pronounce that ENT. Let's have a quick look at one of the verbs that ends in an E. So we're going to use descendre as our example, to go down, to descend. Remember that we just have to remove the E before we add our endings. Our endings never change. They're always the same. So, je descendrai, tu descendrais, il descendrait, nous descendrions, vous descendriez, il descendrait. I would descend, you would descend, etc., etc. at what happens when we want to form the conditional of a verb that is irregular. We can't add our endings onto the infinitive, which is what we do with most other verbs. Instead, we have to do something different. And our verbs that are irregular in the conditional are our usual suspects. So avoir, to have, être, to be, faire, to do or to make, aller, to go, pouvoir, to be able, devoir, to have to, vouloir, to want, our three modal verbs there, savoir, to know. There are more, but I'm just going to show you what happens with these to start with. So we can't add our conditional endings, our would endings, onto the end of the infinitive like we do with other verbs because these verbs are irregular. Instead, we have to create a future stem. So for avoir, that's AUR. Être is SER, so that's a big change. Faire becomes FER. Aller, another big change becomes IR. Pouvoir becomes POURR, devoir becomes DEVR, vouloir becomes VOUDR, and savoir becomes SAUR. And we're just going to add those conditional endings now onto those stems. For example, j'aurais, I would have. Il serait, he would be. Nous ferions, we would do or we would make. Ils iraient, they would go. Tu pourrais, you would be able or you could. Elle devrait, she would have to or she should. Vous voudriez, you would want. And on serait, one would know. And as you can see, our endings are just remaining exactly the same, but instead of adding them onto the infinitive, we're adding them onto the stem that we've created for the irregular verb. Our future stem for most verbs in French will just be the infinitive. So this is what we will add our endings onto, remembering to take the E off if it ends in an E. But so for some verbs, for those irregular verbs, we just need to know the irregular future stem. So the ones that I just showed you on the slide before, and our endings are always going to be the same: AIS, AIS, AIT, IONS, IEZ, AIENT. There are about 20 verbs that are irregular in the future tense and therefore have an irregular future stem. This is a list of pretty much all of them. Most of them we've seen already, but there's a few new ones that are not so common. Acquérir, courir, envoyer, falloir, pleuvoir, valoir, venir, voir are all irregular. And then appeler, appuyer, employer, jeter, and lever. So the ones on the left have quite irregular stems, so you'll see here how they change. Again, you'll see that there's always an R to add the ending onto. And then the ones on the right here, appeler, appuyer, employer, jeter, lever, they just have a bit of a spelling change. So appeler doubles the L, appuyer, employer have an I instead of a Y, jeter doubles the T, lever just adds an accent. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same.